We just want a peaceful Christmas with the kids. Don't come. That was the text. No love you. No, maybe next time. Just that cold clipped final. I stood at the kitchen counter holding my phone like it had bitten me. The timer buzzed behind me. The gingerbread in the oven was ready. I didn't move. Folks, if you're still listening, do let me know. Does my voice sound too shaky? Too slow? I'd really appreciate your thoughts. It's hard telling this one. Anyway, my name is Helen Armstrong. I'm 67, a widow, a mother, a grandmother to 5. And apparently a burden at Christmas. I had been looking forward to that dinner for weeks, made my famous apple cider, pulled out the green plates they used to fight over as kids, even found the old holiday record player David bought our first year married. And then that text. Sent at 6:42 p.m. by my youngest son, Michael. I remember the moment exactly, because the room it didn't feel like mine anymore. It was the 20th of December, a Tuesday. Snow had started to fall outside the condo window, soft flurries on glass, the kind that made everything feel quiet and cruel. The stockings were already up. I'd sewn each one by hand this year, even though my fingers had started to ache. Alma's had a tiny green tree. Ricky's had a bear. Each tag read "Love Grandma." I had wrapped their gifts the night before, put bows on everything, even bought those glittery gift bags the kids like. And still they didn't want me. No chair for me at the table, no space on the couch, no presents in the photos, just silence. And that message, I sat down. The stool was cold. My knees creaked. The cider had gone lukewarm in the pot. I didn't text back. What could I say? That I'd raised them after David's accident, that I gave up a whole retirement fund to help them buy their first homes, that I skipped Florida, skipped cruises, skipped everything, just to stay nearby. They knew. Of course they knew. That's what hurt most. I reached for the gingerbread, took one out, set it on the plate. It crumbled when I bit in. Not because I'd done it wrong, but because I no longer had someone to share it with. The lights on the tiny fake tree blinked like they were confused. Wasn't this supposed to be a celebration? Then why did it feel like a funeral? I glanced at the fireplace mantel. No, not a real fireplace. Just a shelf I had decorated like one. Photos, a candle, the old Christmas card from 1997 where David wrote, "You make this house a home." I used to believe that. But what if the home doesn't want me anymore? I looked at the phone again. Still nothing from Michael. I considered replying, "Okay, I understand," but I didn't. I wouldn't. Because something inside me, something I thought had died with David, shifted. Not bitterness, not revenge. Power. They didn't know. They didn't know I wasn't empty. That the smile I wore at every birthday, the quiet hugs, the steady gifts, all came from something I'd been building in silence. $8 million. Hidden in stocks I bought decades ago in a name no one remembered but me. And suddenly that silence I'd been handed, it didn't feel like rejection. It felt like an invitation. Would you still show up? After David died, the house grew too quiet. Not the kind of quiet you crave after a long day. The kind that lingers, that hums low through the air vents and settles in your bones. It made the kitchen faucet sound like a scream. I remember walking down the hallway and hearing nothing but my own feet. No television murmuring in the living room. No hammer tapping in the garage. Just space. Empty space. I started sleeping on his side of the bed. Not to replace him, just to reach for something warm. His pillow still smelled like cedar and motor oil. That scent stayed longer than I expected. Longer than the casseroles friends dropped off. Longer than the sympathy cards. Longer than the calls. We had been married 39 years. People say that's a lifetime. But grief doesn't care about math. It rips through your timelines like a storm through laundry on a line. David worked with his hands. He built fences, sheds, patios. He once made a rocking horse for Derek's 3rd birthday, painted it red because that boy runs on fire. He built our home too. Not just the wood, the shingles, the porch swing, but the way he'd leave the porch light on when I came home late from PTA. The way he'd grab my hand and whisper, "You're still my girl," even when I wore flannel pajamas. When he passed, The mortgage passed to me. So did the bills, and two boys half grown but not yet standing steady. I went back to teaching a week later. No time to mourn when the electric bills passed due. I stood in front of teenagers reading To Kill a Mockingbird while wondering if I had enough gas to get home. At night, I tutored neighborhood kids. $10 an hour, sometimes $5 if the parents couldn't swing it. I never turned them away. I clipped coupons, cooked rice in every way known to man, made Christmas gifts out of recycled tin cans, called them memory jars, each one filled with little notes. You are braver than you think. Your dad would be proud. Grandma believes in you. I remember Michael opening his. He read every note, then looked up with glassy eyes and said, "You're the best mom in the world." That memory stayed tucked inside me through every sleepless night, every late bill, every missed doctor visit. I skipped to buy them new coats. I used to believe I mattered. That without me, the whole house would fall apart. And maybe it would have, but no one remembers the scaffold once the building is up. No one thanks the glue once the photo is framed. And lately, I feel like that glue. Dry, invisible, cracked at the edges. Still here but not seen. I sold the house the spring Michael graduated from college, the porch where we used to drink coffee in winter, the backyard where we planted David's ashes beneath the lilac tree, all of it packed into cardboard and signed away. I told myself it was the right thing. Closer to the boys, I said. They'd want me nearby. We'd share Sundays again like the old days. Game nights, potlucks, stories after dinner. I moved into a small condo, just 15 minutes away. It was clean. Too clean. No peeling paint, no creaky floors, no smell of cinnamon in the vents. No history. The first few months I kept waiting for someone to drop by. I baked banana bread, hung a welcome family sign on the door, put Michael's childhood drawing in the hallway, the one with me holding his hand in front of a crooked house and a sun too big for the sky. But weeks passed. Then months. They were busy. That's what they said anyway. One Sunday, I drove to Derek's house unannounced. I'd made a stew, the kind their dad used to love with barley and beef bones boiled down for hours. His wife opened the door, smiled. That kind of smile you give to a stranger with good intentions. "Oh, hi, Helen. We're just about to head out." She didn't invite me in. Didn't ask about the stew. Just closed the door gently like I was weather she didn't want blowing in. The next week, Michael called. "Mom, maybe check in before dropping by next time, just so we can plan better." Plan. I used to be the plan. I was the one who knew the dentist appointments, who remembered the science fair projects, who kept the house running when David worked 12-hour days. Now I needed an appointment to see my own sons. One evening that fall, I passed by Michael's place. Lights were on. Laughter floated from the open kitchen window. I saw Alma through the glass wearing a sweater I'd knit the Christmas before. My hand hovered above the car horn, but I didn't press it. I just watched, like a neighbor. I parked down the street. Saturday in the dark. The stew sat on the passenger seat, still warm in its pot. I told myself I'd just stop in for a minute, but my feet didn't move. I watched the shadows on the curtains, waited for a sign someone knew I was there. None came. That night I drove home in silence. No radio, no hum of conversation, just the sound of the pot shifting when I braked too hard at the stoplight. I didn't bring it up. Didn't ask why they hadn't called. Didn't say I saw the lights. Didn't mention the sweater. I just poured the stew into small containers and froze them. For a time I still hoped would come back. It started small. A raised eyebrow. A pause too long after my suggestions. A laugh light, polite, followed by, "That's not really how we do things anymore, Helen." I first noticed it at Derek's daughter's birthday. I'd brought homemade cupcakes, lemon vanilla with little sugar bees on top. Alma used to love those when she was her age. So did the boys. But when I set them down on the table, Lisa smiled, tight teeth clenched, and said, "Oh, how sweet. But we already ordered from that gluten-free place the kids prefer." She didn't take any. Neither did Derek. Alma reached for one. Lisa gently pulled her hand back. "Let's not upset your tummy, love." I stood there holding the empty tray, feeling like I'd brought something dangerous instead of dessert. Later that day, while cleaning up, I asked if they needed help putting away the decorations. Lisa looked at me and said, that's okay. You don't need to fuss. Just relax and enjoy being a guest. A guest? In my own son's house. I nodded, smiled, wiped my hands on a napkin and sat by the window. The party moved on without me. Photos singing the kids opening presents. No one asked me to sit close. No one offered me a piece of cake. At one point, I tried to chime into a conversation about school apps. I said I used to keep everything in a little notebook, color-coded. Never missed a parent-teacher meeting. Lisa laughed. It wasn't mean, not really. Just dismissive. That's adorable, Helen. But things are different now. It's all automated. You'd be surprised. Then she turned back to the group. And I just sat there, holding my cup of cold tea. I looked down and realized I was gripping it too tight. The handle bit into my palm, but I didn't let go. I remembered the years I stayed up late sewing Halloween costumes, the times I walked through snowstorms to parent conferences, the nights I ate cereal for dinner so they could have lunch money. None of that counted now. I was quaint, old school, something to smile politely at but never include. Later in the kitchen, I overheard Lisa whisper to Derek, "She means well, but it's like, she just doesn't get how life works now." I stepped back, quiet as I could, pressed my hand to the wall to steady myself. In that moment, I didn't feel like a burden. I felt like static, like background noise they'd learned to tune out. And the cruelest part, they weren't even trying to be cruel. They just stopped seeing me. Maybe I really am in the way. The next dinner was at Michael's place. It was supposed to be casual, just a Wednesday night meal. He'd said, come by around 6, nothing fancy. I wore the blue cardigan Alma once said, made me look like Sky. Brought over my cranberry salad. That recipe had followed me for decades, passed down from my mother, always a favorite on our table. But when I arrived, Lisa was already in the kitchen. "Hey Helen," she said, glancing up from a mixing bowl. "We made Thai tonight, spicy noodles and tofu. Hope that's okay." I smiled, held out the salad. "Oh, just a little something. You know, tradition." She didn't take it. Just nodded toward the fridge. "You can leave it there." The table was set for 6. 2 candles flickered softly. I reached to adjust one that wobbled and Lisa gently moved my hand away. "Let's not fuss. We've got it." I sat between Michael and Alma. They chatted about school apps, new projects, a weekend trip to Denver. I offered to help watch the kids during their travel. Lisa smiled polite as always. "Oh, no need. We've booked a sitter already. You should relax." That word again. Relax. Sit. Be still. Be quiet. Later, after the dishes were cleared, we gathered in the living room. Alma was brushing a doll's hair. I saw her struggling and leaned over. "Sweetheart, I used to braid your daddy's hair just like that. When he was your age, he had curls so wild." "She's fine," Lisa, cut in voice smooth. "She doesn't like people touching her toys too much." I froze. Michael said nothing. He looked at the television, nodded slowly like he hadn't heard either one of us clearly, or just didn't want to. I moved my hands to my lap, folded them, pressed the fingers together so they wouldn't shake. In my mind, I finished the story. Michael with jelly on his cheek curls bouncing, saying, "Braids make me brave, mama." But that memory didn't belong here. Not anymore. I glanced at the shelf above the fireplace. It held framed pictures, Alma's school portrait, a photo of Lisa's parents at the lake, a printout from their last vacation in Hawaii. I wasn't in any of them. Not a single one. Not even the one from last year's Christmas. I remembered standing at the end of the group holding Alma's hand, but the frame held a cropped version, tighter, cleaner. Neater without me. Dinner ended early. Lisa yawned. Michael thanked me for coming. As I walked to the door, Alma hugged my legs. "Bye, Grandma," she said. I looked down at her little fingers gripping my calf, felt warmth, a flicker, then she let go and ran back to her tablet. The hallway light flicked on behind me. Lisa didn't say goodbye. Michael kissed my cheek barely. I stepped out into the cold. The cranberry salad sat untouched in their fridge. Still sweet, still mine, still invisible. If your voice was erased at the dinner table, would you still stay? It came up over brunch. Michael had invited me to a little cafe near his office, an olive green place with tin chairs and reclaimed wood tables. Not our usual diner, not where we shared pancakes on Sundays when the boys were little. I knew something was off the moment I arrived. He stood to hug me but barely touched my shoulder. His coffee was already half gone. His phone face down but close like a ticking clock. We talked lightly at first. He asked how my plants were doing. I told him the poinsettia from Christmas had finally died. He laughed too fast, then cleared his throat. There's something we wanted to run by you. That we again. I smiled and nodded. Of course, dear. What is it? He pulled out a slim folder from his coat pocket, placed it on the table between our mugs. The motion was careful, practiced. It's just a little estate thing. Lisa's been helping get our finances in order, long-term stuff. We thought since you're living nearby now it makes sense to streamline everything. I didn't reach for the folder, just looked at it. Cream-colored, no logo, my name handwritten in soft pencil, Helen M. Armstrong. What kind of streamlining, I asked. He sipped his drink, avoided eye contact. Consolidation, trust structures, just basics really. Nothing's changing, it's just a way to make sure you know we're aligned. Aligned. The word stuck. I opened the folder slowly. Inside 4 pages neatly stapled. Legalese. Too neat, too brief. He slid a pen across. There's no rush, but if you're comfortable we could file this week. I stared at the paper. Terms I recognized floated like ghosts: beneficiary, executor, primary access. What does it change for me? I asked, eyes still on the text. Nothing. Not really. It just formalizes how things will eventually go. It protects everyone. Everyone. I felt something flutter in my chest. Not fear. Not kite. Just a shift. The same shift I felt when David told me he was sick. When the doctor's tone changed. When the silence before news stretched too long. Michael looked at me then. Finally. Mom, this is just what families do. It's peace of mind. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled slightly, not enough to see, but I felt it. His gaze flicked to my fingers. I signed. The whole time I told myself this is what trust looks like. This is what love built over years deserves. Afterward, we talked about nothing. How cold the coffee was. How Lisa's new job was stressful. How Alma's braces hurt. But I couldn't feel the seat under me anymore. Couldn't taste the toast. Couldn't hear the clink of silverware around us. It was all wrapped in cotton. As we hugged goodbye, Michael kissed my forehead. You're doing the right thing, Mom. We've got you. I walked back to my car, folders still in hand. Didn't turn on the radio. Didn't drive home. Instead, I parked at the public library, Saturday in the lot with the engine off, and opened my glove box. Inside were the copies of the old deed, David's will, the original trust we'd signed together after his accident. I held them up against the new document. Something didn't sit right. The names had changed. The order. I squinted. Lisa's name was listed second right after Michael. Mine, third. And at the very bottom, under alternate asset allocation, was a clause I didn't remember ever seeing. I folded the papers slowly. Hands cold now. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe. But something in me whispered. This isn't just paperwork. Asterisk. That night I couldn't sleep. The folder lay on the kitchen table. Closed but loud. Louder than the ticking clock above the sink. Louder than the wind scratching at the window. I made chamomile tea. Let it steep too long. Bitter, no honey. Just like me. The house was quiet in a different way now, not mourning quiet, but watching quiet. Like even the walls were waiting to see what I'd do next. I opened the cabinet above the fridge, pulled out the old metal box David used for our documents. It still had the faded sticker on it, asterisk Mendez and Armstrong, our plan asterisk. That plan once included dreams, vacations we never took, a retirement cabin we never bought, a bench we never finished. I flipped through the files, each one marked in David's tidy block letters. House, will, trust, insurance. Everything used to feel clear, simple, built together. I found our original trust form, 2 pages notarized, my name and his side by side. No Lisa. No language about reassignment of primary designation. No alternate pathways that skipped me entirely. My fingers felt colder with every comparison. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I called Hank, our old estate lawyer. He answered on the second ring. Mrs. Armstrong, it's been a while. His voice cracked like it had aged with the paper. I explained briefly, told him I'd signed something new, asked if he remembered our original documents. There was a pause. Too long. Then a cough. Well, people update things all the time. Your son said you were consolidating. My son said that I asked flat. Another pause. Yes, he mentioned it last month. Said you were all on the same page. I didn't answer right away. Just stared at the papers in front of me. Hank, I said quietly, if I'd been removed or replaced in any way legally, wouldn't I have been told directly, well, yes, technically, but if you sign with full consent, I hung up. Not out of anger, just enough. Enough silence, enough pretending. I placed the phone face down, took a deep breath. My chest ached in a way that wasn't physical. I gathered the documents, slipped them into a new envelope, wrote one word on it, *review, *. Then I opened the small safe in the hallway closet, punched in the 6-digit code David once chose *042,879 our anniversary. It clicked open. Inside the original will, bank statements, and something I hadn't touched in over 15 years, a sealed manila envelope marked Helen only. I didn't open it. Not yet. I added the new papers to the pile, closed the safe, spun the dial until it locked with a soft clunk. Back in the kitchen, I stared at the table. The tea had gone cold, the lights too bright, everything too still. I stood in that silence, held it like a familiar coat and whispered to no one. They think I don't know. Let's see. Isolation doesn't happen all at once. It creeps in quiet, polite, wrapped in good intentions and calendar conflicts. It started with unanswered texts. First a delay, then a full day, then no reply at all. I used to get photos. Alma in ballet class, Ricky at his science fair, now nothing. The family thread fell silent, or maybe I'd been moved out of it. One morning I baked blueberry muffins and brought them to Derek's office. The receptionist smiled awkwardly. He's in a meeting. Want to leave them here? I nodded. Left the basket with a note, still warm, just like old mornings. No one called. No one said thank you. A week later, I offered to help Lisa while Alma had a cold. Let me pick her up from school, I said. I'm free all week. She smiled, polished, efficient. That's sweet, Helen. But we've got it. We just don't want to confuse her routine. Confuse her? I'd raised that routine. Once when Michael had the flu, I held him for 12 hours straight, rubbed Vicks on his chest, sang the ABCs over and over because it made his fever dreams stop. Now I might confuse things. I stopped offering, started walking more. The library became my refuge. It smelled of dust and old bindings. People whispered there, and when no one whispered to me, I didn't feel out of place. I sat in the history aisle, same corner every Thursday. I didn't check anything out, just touched the spines, read the dedications. One afternoon, as I opened a worn poetry book, something fluttered to the floor. A folded page-lined notebook paper with stars drawn along the edge. I bent down to pick it up, recognized the handwriting immediately. Alma. Grandma, if you find this, it means you're in the library again. I'm sorry Mommy says not to bother you too much. I miss your cookies. Can we make those lemon ones again someday? I think about you a lot. Love, A. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the rest. On the back, she'd drawn a tiny version of our kitchen, me with a mixing bowl, her on a stool laughing. I ran my fingers over the pencil lines, smudged but careful, intentional. Someone still remembered. Someone still saw me. The world around me, the aisles, the books, the quiet blurred, not from sadness, not from joy, but from the simple ache of being noticed. I folded the note and slipped it into my coat pocket, right next to my chest, let it rest there. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel erased. Just waiting. The next Thursday, I returned to the library with a small note in my pocket. Written in my neatest script, folded twice, tucked inside the cover of Charlotte's Web, Alma's favorite when she was 6. Dearest Alma, yes, we can make lemon cookies again. Maybe even the chocolate ones if your parents say yes. I miss you too, and I'm always thinking of you. Love, Grandma. I placed it carefully between pages 84 and 85, where Wilbur starts to believe someone out there truly sees him. It felt right, like a tiny lifeline across a silent ocean. The week after I came back again. No new note, but I left one anyway. This time inside, Anne of Green Gables. She used to call me Marilla when I wore my stern face. Don't forget to wear socks when it gets cold, I wrote. And I left a surprise in the coat closet at home. Ask Daddy to help you find it. Just a small box of lemon drops wrapped in yellow ribbon. By the 3rd week, it became routine. A rhythm. I borrowed books I knew Alma might choose. Left gentle notes. Drawings. A sticker from my sticker drawer, the one I hadn't opened in years. It felt like breathing again. Like some part of me long flattened was unfolding, reaching. Until the call came. It was Michael. His voice was careful, measured. The kind of tone you use when you're about to disappoint someone you believe still loves you. Mom, I need to talk to you about something. Sensitive. I knew. Before he even said it, I knew. We found a few notes. In Alma's books. And, look, I know you meant well, but Lisa thinks it's confusing her. I didn't speak. He went on. She's been asking a lot of questions lately. Why she doesn't see you more. Why her gifts from you don't show up like they used to. I held the phone tighter. She misses me, I said quietly. I know, but we're just trying to keep things balanced, stable. That word again. Stable. Like I was weather. Like I was a risk to be forecasted and kept outside the door. He hesitated, then added. So maybe it's best we stop the library thing. Just for now. I nodded, though he couldn't see it. Sure, I whispered. Of course. After the call ended, I sat at the kitchen table. The tea had gone cold. Again. The next Thursday, I still went to the library. Habit maybe. Hope probably. I walked the aisles slower. Let my hand drift across the spines. Checked the usual books. Nothing tucked inside. I sat in my usual corner. Waited longer than usual. Then slowly I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out a folded paper I'd written that morning. Just in case. I didn't place it anywhere. I just held it, warmed it with my hands, watched the door. And, for the first time in weeks, no one left me anything. The book stayed silent. It was Derek's promotion dinner. They booked a private room at the new Italian place downtown. White linen napkins, soft jazz, and more wine glasses than I knew what to do with. Michael had called 3 days before. You're invited, of course, he said. Lisa made the guest list. She said she saved you a seat. I baked a lemon loaf that morning, wrapped it in parchment, and tied it with green twine. Alma's favorite. She wasn't coming. School night, Lisa had texted. Too much stimulation. I stood outside the restaurant a full minute before walking in, checked my reflection in the glass, straightened my blouse, smoothed the flyaway strands of silver hair that never listened anymore. Inside the room buzzed with chatter, laughter, wine. I smiled. Approached the long table. There was no seat card for me. Lisa looked up from the middle. Oh, Helen, we weren't sure you'd make it. There's a spot at the corner. The corner. 2 seats down from the water pitcher, right next to the door. I placed the lemon loaf beside the gift pile. No one noticed. They toasted Derek, talked about quarterly wins, new management. I tried to join a conversation, once mentioned how Derek used to sell lemonade in our driveway at age 10. Lisa smiled. Wow, that's quaint. Then turned to Michael. Do you remember what your first job was? Oh, right. Wasn't it that summer coding class? I faded back into the corner. The pasta arrived cold. Or maybe it was just me. By then, everything felt distant. Lisa stood to give her toast. She clinked her glass gently, smiled wide. We just want to say how proud we are of Derek, of all he's built, of how he leads with vision and care, and how grateful we are to everyone who supported him." She looked around the room, then added without a trace of malice, "And to those who once changed diapers or brought casseroles, don't worry. There comes a time when even the best elders know it's time to pass the torch." The room went still. Forks paused mid-air. Lisa laughed lightly, saying that with love, of course. No one responded. Derek smiled, tight. Michael reached for his glass, didn't meet my eyes. I stood slowly, pushed the chair in without a sound, gathered my coat, slid out the door before dessert. Outside, the air bit through my sleeves. I didn't bring a scarf, just the lemon loaf still untouched on the table. I'd seen Lisa move it aside earlier to make room for a bottle of rosé. I didn't call a cab, didn't wait for anyone to follow. I just walked, block after block, until the restaurant lights faded behind me. As I turned the corner, I glanced back once. Through the tall window, I saw Alma pressed against the glass, small hand on the pane. She wasn't supposed to be there, but she was. And she didn't wave, didn't smile. She just looked at me, like she knew, like she couldn't do anything, like she'd learned too early how silence becomes survival. The apartment felt colder than usual when I walked in. I didn't bother turning on the main light. Just the lamp near the kitchen, a soft amber glow that made the shadows stretch longer than they should. The leftovers were still in the fridge. Fettuccine from the night before. I spooned a portion onto a plate, didn't bother heating it. Saturday at the small table by the window and chewed slowly. The noodles stuck together like they resented being moved. I thought of Lisa's words. Even the best elders know it's time to pass the torch. The best elders. I once packed school lunches every morning by 6:30. I sat through hours of science fair glue fumes and squeaky violin recitals. I spent 23 Christmas Eves wrapping dollar store toys in the laundry room so the boys would believe in magic. But I didn't say anything tonight. Not when it happened. Not when I left. I just slipped out. I finished the pasta, washed the plate, let the water run a little too long just to hear something alive. Then I checked the mail. Inside the small metal box was a cream envelope, thick, embossed, elegant. I opened it carefully like it might shatter. Inside was a thank you card. From Derek and Lisa. Pre-printed, typed signature. "Thank you for joining us to celebrate Derek's promotion. Your presence means the world." No handwritten note. No mention of the lemon loaf. No love. Just ink. I left the envelope on the counter. Didn't tear it, didn't file it, just left it there. That night I couldn't sleep. Again. The apartment walls felt closer than usual. Or maybe I'd just grown smaller. I made tea. Didn't drink it. Pulled out a small notebook from the bottom drawer. Hardcover navy blue, unopened. A gift from a retired colleague years ago. It had a ribbon bookmark and gold-trimmed pages. Too nice to use, I'd said. But tonight I opened it, clicked the old pen I kept for birthdays and condolences, and wrote, ****, I was someone once. ****. Then, ****, not just a mother, not just a helper, not just a guest. ****. I let the pen rest between my fingers. Looked out the window. The city lights blinked back indifferent. Maybe that was the worst part, not anger, not cruelty. Just indifference. I closed the notebook. Didn't cry, didn't rage, just breathed. Slow, even, still here. Still watching. And if you're hearing this now, maybe you've felt that too. That quiet shift from being necessary to being tolerated. That moment someone thanks you for showing up to a life you helped build. If any part of this echoes in you, if your voice has ever softened just to be allowed in the room, then tell me. What would you write on the first page? Because sometimes all it takes is a single line to remind the world, you were never invisible. I wasn't looking for it. I was reorganizing the closet. It had rained the night before, and the leak near the ceiling had started again. Old boxes needed moving. Plastic bins. The fireproof safe tucked behind David's tool case. I hadn't opened it in over a year. The keypad beeped. Asterisk, asterisk, oh, 42,879, asterisk, asterisk, our anniversary. Inside, everything looked the same, until I noticed a file tucked behind the insurance documents, one I didn't remember placing there. Labeled in faded pen asterisk AgriFund, Armstrong Holdings, asterisk, I pulled it out. The paper inside had yellowed slightly, edges curled. David's handwriting neat block letters. The portfolio summary was dated asterisk 2004 asterisk. Back when we invested in that agriculture startup, just a few thousand back then for a maybe someday kind of plan. But stapled to the back was a newer sheet, a printed amendment from asterisk 2022 asterisk. That couldn't be right. I scanned the names. Michael Armstrong, primary, Lisa Armstrong, joint authority. My name wasn't there. Not even under alternate, just gone. My pulse quickened. I reread it 3 times, finger tracing each line like Braille. I tried to remember, had I signed something specific. I remembered brunch. The file. Michael saying, it's just housekeeping. But this wasn't housekeeping. This was disappearance. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning I dressed with care. Navy coat, wool scarf, notebook in my purse. I took the original file, both the old and new pages, and drove to the bank David had used for 20 years. The branch hadn't changed much. Same brick walls, same glass door with the smudged push bar. Inside I asked for someone in legacy accounts. They sent me to a woman named Margaret, hair silvered at the roots, eyes tired but kind. I handed her the papers, said I just wanted to verify the current status of the AgriFund holdings. She scanned them, then looked at her monitor, fingers moving slowly, too slowly. I'm sorry, she said. There's limited access on this account. I can't show full details unless you're a listed beneficiary. I said, firm but calm. My husband and I opened it together. My name was on the original trust. She nodded, paused again. Well, I do see some updates here. It looks like there were changes in March of 2022. Name adjustments, account permissions. It's not uncommon. Not uncommon. I leaned in. Who requested the change? She hesitated. Voice dropped. I can't disclose that, ma'am. Of course not. But her eyes flicked once toward the screen, then back to me. She shifted in her seat. What I can offer, she said, is a printed verification of last update activity. It won't show names, but it will give you timestamps. Please. She stood. Came back minutes later with a half-page receipt. Ink faint. Lines misaligned. But it was there. Update date the 14th of March 2022. Authorized access changed. Previous structure archived. I thanked her. Folded the paper slowly. Slipped it into my notebook. As I walked out, rain began again, light cold tapping at my coat like a reminder. I didn't cry. Didn't call anyone. I just walked to my car, turned the heater on low, and sat with my hands gripping the wheel. Tight. White-knuckled. They'd erased me. Not loudly, not all at once. Just, over time. And they thought I'd never notice. Back home, I set the folded bank receipt on the table. Didn't touch it for a while. Just stared. Like it might confess something if I waited long enough. Then I pulled out the blue notebook. The one I'd barely touched since that night. Its pages still crisp. Too clean for the weight I was about to give them. Page 1 still held the line I'd written before. Asterisk, asterisk, I was someone once. Asterisk, asterisk. Beneath it, I wrote a new heading. Asterisk, asterisk. They changed the names. Asterisk, asterisk. I listed the date from the receipt, the 14th of March 2022. I wrote down every detail. Margaret had shown me the amendment, the missing name, the phrase, archived. I copied the old trust language. Then beside it the new one from the AgriFund page. Side by side it was undeniable. My name was once first. Now I wasn't anywhere. I paused. Ran my fingers over David's old signature on the original form. Steady. Blue ink. Confident curves. He always signed like he meant it. Then I remembered something. Something David once told me when we were young and poor and figuring everything out. We were at a diner splitting one pancake between us, laughing because we'd just overdrawn our checking account by $12. He reached across the table and held my hand. If we ever build something big, he said, don't let anyone redraw the map unless they walked the road with you. Back then I thought he meant other couples, or lawyers, or strangers. I didn't realize the people with the erasers might be our own. I closed the notebook, set it aside, then walked to my desk. I hadn't used the old laptop in weeks. The screen glowed pale blue as it booted, slow like it wasn't sure I meant to wake it. I opened my email. To Harris@crosbyandme.com. Subject, Re-Legacy Clarification. Helen Armstrong. I hadn't spoken to Harold Harris in 15 years. He handled David's estate after the accident. Dry voice, slow, nod always smelled like peppermints and dust. But he was fair and thorough. I let my fingers hover over the keyboard, then typed, Dear Mr. Harris, I hope this message finds you well. I believe there may have been changes to our original trust structure that require review. Attached are copies of the relevant documents. Would you be available for a consultation this week, asterisk? Then I stopped, deleted the last line, typed again. Please keep this inquiry confidential. I need clarity before I confront anyone, asterisk. I sat back. Read it twice. No drama. No accusation. Just movement. My movement. The cursor blinked, like it was waiting for me to decide. I hit send. Then closed the laptop. Outside, the sky had gone pink. Clouds streaked low like brush strokes, the kind David used to paint in the garage when he thought no one was watching. I stood by the window. Let the light hit my hands. Let it sit there. Warm. Undeniable. They'd moved me out of the paperwork, but not out of the story. Not yet. I didn't sleep that night. The apartment was too quiet, too still. Even the old pipes stayed silent as if they knew something was shifting. I sat at the kitchen table with the folder open, pages spread like a crime scene. Dates, signatures, footnotes, ink faded in some places, glaring in others. The lamp above buzzed faintly. Its light yellowed soft, just enough to read without making the darkness feel offended. I reread everything. Twice. I highlighted dates, circled names, underlined phrases like asterisk revocable rights asterisk and asterisk successor authority asterisk. And then, I reached for the small envelope tucked deep in the safe, the one labeled Helen Only, David's handwriting. Still steady, still his. My hands trembled slightly as I peeled the flap open. Inside a single page, folded once, typed on his old typewriter. Ink smudged in the lower corner like he'd paused and thought too hard on a word. Helen. If you're reading this, I'm not there anymore. Asterisk. And I'm sorry. Not for leaving because I know you'll handle that part better than I ever could. But sorry you have to do this alone. Asterisk. Asterisk. There's something I never told you, not fully. Asterisk. The AgriFund account. It did better than we ever imagined. Asterisk. I wanted it to be a safety net. For you, not the boys, not anyone else. Because they'll have time to rebuild if things go wrong. Asterisk. But you, Helen, you gave everything. Your time, your body, your sleep, your dreams. Asterisk. So this is yours. Asterisk. If anyone tries to say otherwise, check the old trust form we signed in 2005. I made sure you were the sole beneficiary, no one else. Asterisk. Protect it. Not because of the money, but because it proves who you are. Asterisk. And if they ever try to make you feel like you're just part of the past, remember asterisk. You are the roots, not a branch, never a guest. Asterisk. Love you always, David. I read it once, then again. By the third time, my tears blurred the last 3 lines, but I didn't wipe them away. They weren't sadness. They weren't even grief. They were clarity. He knew. Even then, he knew what silence could become, what family can forget when convenience meets opportunity. And he'd prepared for it. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with truth. I looked down at the folder, the fake signatures, the redacted clauses, Lisa's name where mine should have been, and in that moment I realized they hadn't just tried to take money, they'd tried to take authorship, erase the ink of every sacrifice I ever made, rewrite the ending without the woman who built the first chapter. But David had left me the pen, and now I was ready to write it back. The morning crept in through the blinds, pale and uncertain. I hadn't slept, but I didn't feel tired, just clear. The blue notebook still lay open beside the empty teacup, its spine finely broken pages curled slightly from use. I flipped to the next page, wrote at the top, asterisk asterisk, what they forgot to count, asterisk asterisk. Then, line by line, I began. Hours spent tutoring neighborhood kids to pay off the mortgage. Asterisk asterisk, lunches packed from food stamps and love. Asterisk asterisk, birthdays planned on post-it notes stuck to the side of a flower jar. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Doctor's appointments rescheduled so Michael could go to soccer. Asterisk, asterisk, savings drained for Derek's braces. Asterisk, asterisk, nights spent grading essays while feverish. Asterisk, asterisk, Thanksgivings cooked alone while they traveled. Asterisk, asterisk. The pen moved steadily. My hand didn't shake. I wasn't writing for memory. I was writing for evidence, because this was the part they never saw. This was the currency they never tallied. The soft labor, the invisible infrastructure. And now, when the narrative no longer needed me, they tried to redraw the foundation like I was never there. I paused, ran my fingers along the edge of the paper, then flipped to the inside cover and added, asterisk, asterisk, legacy is not what's left in a will. It's what no one can steal. Asterisk, asterisk. I stared at the sentence for a long time, then stood, went to the sink, washed the teacup, dried it with the good towel, the one I used when guests came, and this time I used it for me. I changed clothes, pressed my blouse flat with the palm of my hand, applied lipstick, tied a scarf around my neck, not for the cold but for the color. Then I picked up the landline. It still sat on the kitchen wall. Still worked, still reliable. I dialed slowly. Crosby and Mead Law Firm. Asterisk, asterisk. Reception picked up on the second ring. Good morning, this is Amy speaking. I kept my voice level, warm, but unshakable. Hello, Amy. This is Helen Armstrong. I'd like to speak with Harold Harris, please. It's regarding a matter of trust. One moment, ma'am. Hold music played softly, chimes, piano, something delicate. Then, Helen, his voice hadn't changed much. Still gravel and old wood. Hello, Harold. I'm ready to talk about what's mine. A pause, then a breath. All right, he said. When would you like to come in? I looked out the window. The sky was finally blue again, clean and cloudless. Today, I said. If you have time. I do now. I hung up, straightened my scarf, slipped the blue notebook into my purse, and as I reached for my keys, a thought came sudden and full. They built their comfort on the back of my silence. Asterisk, but not anymore. Now, I'd speak. The next morning, I walked into First Central Bank before the doors had even finished unlocking. Hi there, I said to the young man behind the desk. I'd like to schedule a beneficiary reassessment and close a joint account. He blinked twice, then nodded. Of course, ma'am. Do you have identification? I did. Driver's license, birth certificate, and a copy of the original trust highlighted, annotated, and freshly reviewed by Harold Harris. I signed the necessary forms with steady hands, transferred funds, changed passcodes. Quietly, cleanly. The woman in the cubicle next to mine complimented my scarf. Pretty color, she said. Thank you, I replied. My husband picked it years ago. The truth in that sentence sat heavy but not sad. He had chosen well. By noon, I had canceled the auto payments for Derek's mortgage cosign. By 1, I had submitted a request to freeze the education fund until Alma turned 18. Every click felt like a thread being pulled back into my palm, a thread I had once handed over freely. Too freely. By 3 o'clock, my phone buzzed. Lisa, the message read. Hey, just saw an alert about Alma's fund, some bank thing. All good, I hope. No greeting, no punctuation. Just the kind of message that smiles through gritted teeth. I stared at the screen. Typed. Deleted. Typed again. Settled on one sentence. We'll talk soon. On my terms. I hit send. Then turned the phone over. Let it vibrate into silence. I went to the hallway closet next. Pulled out the box marked 2000 to 2010. Inside old calendars. Bank slips. Emails printed from an era before smartphones. Receipts from every child's copay. Every box of diapers I paid for without a word. Letters David wrote while working out of state. I sorted them carefully. Scanned what mattered. Filed the rest. Proof. Not for them. For me, to remember the weight of all I carried before they tried to claim I hadn't. Later that evening, I brewed tea with fresh lemon. Saturday by the window with my blue notebook open. Page marked recovery steps. I listed each completed move like stitches pulled through tight fabric. Close joint investment accounts. Reinstate original beneficiary file. Contact 3 legacy charities for potential trust allocation. Prepare updated will. The list wasn't long, but it was mine. Mine in a way nothing else had felt in years. The kettle hissed on the stove. I poured slowly, let the steam curl around my face. Smelled citrus and something old returning. Then I wrote at the bottom of the page, "Justice is not rage, it is restoration." And under that, legacy begins in silence, but it ends with a signature. The phone buzzed again. I didn't look. Not yet. I mailed the letters on a Tuesday morning. 3 envelopes. Cream paper, no decoration, just their names in my handwriting, Michael, Derek, Lisa. Inside each one the same note. There are things you need to know. Come as you are. Saturday, 2 o'clock, Helen. No return address, no signature flourish, just black ink and the truth waiting. I chose the library, not the big modern one with computers and glass elevators. The old brick building off Elm Street, where I used to take the boys on rainy afternoons, where David once read aloud from the paper while I dozed with my head on his shoulder. There's a quiet room in the back, smells like sun-dried paper and lemon oil, used mostly for community chess and the occasional book club, but this Saturday it would be mine. I arrived an hour early, set out 4 chairs, no refreshments, no agenda, just a folder placed neatly in the center of the table, inside copies of everything. The trust forms, the bank receipt, David's letter, my updated beneficiary list, and a simple typed page. This is not a confrontation. This is not revenge. This is me reclaiming what was never yours to take. I sat in the seat closest to the window. Light streamed through the dust-speckled glass. I let it warm my hands. The room stayed silent, except for the soft creak of the wooden door opening, then closing. Michael entered first, his hair uncombed, eyes wary. He nodded but didn't speak. Lisa followed, sunglasses on indoors. She scanned the room like it offended her, Saturday farthest from the folder. Then Derek, late as always, carrying nothing but a nervous smile. No one reached for the papers. That was fine. I didn't speak right away. Let them sit in the silence they'd built around me for years. Let them feel what it was like to be in a room where someone else held the ground. Finally, I looked at Michael. There's no drama here, I said. No raised voices, no accusations. I turned to Lisa, but I will not apologize for existing, or for protecting what I've built. Derek shifted in his chair, looked at the folder then at me. What is this? He asked softly. I smiled. Not out of pleasure, out of steadiness. This, I said, is the part of the story you forgot to write me into. No one moved. Then Alma's voice came faintly from the hallway. Grandma. Everyone turned. She stood just outside the doorway, holding a library book tight to her chest. Lisa half rose from her seat, but I lifted a hand. It's all right, I said. She's the only one I invited in. Alma stepped forward. Saturday beside me without asking. rested her hand on mine. And in that moment, everything I had prepared no longer felt like defense. It felt like truth standing up straight. If you've ever had to defend your place in your own story, if you've ever been asked to leave the table you built, tell me, what would you lay down in the middle of the room? Your voice might be quiet, but it matters more than they ever told you. Lisa was the first to speak. This is ridiculous, she snapped, her sunglasses now pushed up onto her head, her eyes sharp and shiny. You bring us here, throw a pile of papers on the table like some courtroom stunt? What is this supposed to be, Helen? A lecture? I didn't flinch, didn't raise my voice, didn't even blink. I simply slid the folder across the table. Its weight made the wood creak slightly. The sound cut through the room like a thread being pulled. Michael stared at the folder, hands clasped in front of him. Still? Then, without a word, he reached forward and opened it. He read slowly. Derek leaned in over his shoulder. Lisa stayed frozen, arms crossed, lips pressed into a tight line. The room fell into a hush, the kind only found in libraries and between heartbeats. The first page was David's letter, typed, unmistakably him. Michael's eyes flicked back and forth, jaw tightening with every sentence. When he reached the part about the trust, how David had intended it solely for me, his breath hitched. He turned the page. The original signed trust, then the bank receipt, then the clause Lisa had likely never expected me to read. Silence. Lisa stood abruptly. This is all out of context. You don't understand how these things work. People change documents all the time. It's not malicious, it's smart. Michael didn't speak. He just kept reading. The kind of reading that isn't about words anymore, it's about recognizing the shape of guilt. Derek cleared his throat. I didn't know, he said, voice barely audible. I thought everything was handled through the firm. Handled. Like I was a spreadsheet, a tax liability. I looked at Lisa then. She couldn't meet my gaze. Her fingers trembled as she picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. Alma's hand was still on mine. Steady. Warm. I spoke gently. No one's going to prison, Lisa. No lawyers, no press. I leaned forward just slightly. But I am done being erased. Done being the invisible line under everyone else's story. Michael looked up. His eyes were red. He didn't try to wipe them. Why didn't you say anything sooner? He asked. I exhaled. I did. In birthday cards. In lasagnas. In watching your kids when you traveled. In the silence after you all stopped calling. I paused. But this, I tapped the folder. This is the first time I've spoken in your language. Paper. Policy. Control. He nodded slowly. The room was still again. But it wasn't cold this time. It was holding its breath. Michael was the first to break the silence. He closed the folder gently, fingers resting on the cover like it might slip away. What do you want from us now? He asked. His voice wasn't defensive, just tired. Like someone standing in a house he suddenly realized he didn't help build. I met his eyes. Not money, I said. Lisa shifted in her seat. I don't want an apology either. Not the kind that gets whispered after dinner or scribbled in a card once a year. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. I want recognition. Michael frowned. You mean, like, acknowledgement? No, I said. I mean recognition. To be seen again. To be named as what I was and still am. I leaned forward, slightly voice steady. I want you to remember that I stayed when David got sick, that I sold the land my father gave me to put you through school, that I worked 2 jobs when the heater broke and never once said it was your fault, that every birthday cake came from scratch even when my back ached and my feet were swollen. I looked at Derek, then Michael. You talk about building legacies, building futures, but who do you think laid the foundation? Who kept the roof from leaking while you were chasing degrees? Derek lowered his gaze. I want to hear you say, I continued, that you know I wasn't just background, that I was the structure, that you stood on me. The words didn't come from bitterness. They came from a place deeper than that, a place carved out by decades of silence. Michael rubbed the back of his neck. I didn't know, he said softly. Not all of it. I know you didn't, I replied. Because I didn't tell you. I thought if I just kept giving, eventually you'd see. I looked toward the window. The afternoon light was beginning to fade, turning golden against the bookshelves. But when you stop being seen, you start to forget you exist. And that's the most dangerous thing anyone can let happen. No one spoke. Even Lisa stayed quiet now. In the stillness, Alma reached into her bag and pulled out something folded. A note. She slid it across the table toward me. I opened it slowly. A drawing. Me and her in the kitchen, mixing bowl, flour on our cheeks. She had written in careful letters above us, asterisk, asterisk. My grandma matters. Asterisk, asterisk. The words blurred. Not because they were wrong, but because they were truer than anything else in that room. I smiled, tucked the drawing into the blue notebook beside me, closed it gently. I don't need to win anything, I said. I just needed to stop losing myself. The room held its breath. Lisa sat back in her chair, arms crossed but no longer tight. Her face was unreadable, lips pressed, eyes distant. But she wasn't interrupting anymore. Michael finally spoke. I can't undo what we signed, he said. His voice was quiet, no longer the clipped tone of a son trying to control a narrative. But I can fix what comes next. I'll talk to the lawyer. We'll restore your name on everything. I promise. I looked at him, not unkindly, but not softly, either. I'm not here for promises, Michael. Not the kind that come only after you're caught. He flinched but nodded. Then I'll show you, he said. No more hiding. No more assumptions. I turned to Lisa. She met my gaze for the first time. No sarcasm, no deflection, just quiet. I thought I was protecting our future, she said. I didn't see what I was erasing. I gave her a small nod. There's nothing wrong with building forward. Just don't build over the people who gave you the ground. No one spoke for a long moment. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. The old library walls creaked softly like even they were exhaling. I stood slowly, picked up the folder, tucked it under my arm. Michael rose too, but I motioned for him to stay seated. I didn't come here to negotiate, I said. I came here to remember who I was and to make sure you remember too. Derek opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. His eyes dropped to the table. I turned to leave. As I reached the door, I paused, one hand on the frame. Without turning, I said, "Legacy isn't given. It's remembered." Then I stepped into the hallway. The air felt warmer than before, brighter somehow. Not because they had changed, but because I had. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting to be invited in. I was walking out with my story intact, and my name where it belonged. Outside, Alma was sitting on the bench near the front desk, her feet swinging. She looked up and smiled. "Did they listen?" she asked. I bent down, kissed her forehead. "They're starting to." We walked out together. No rush, no more weight dragging behind me. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. The house greeted me with stillness. Not cold, not empty, just quiet in the way a place becomes after something heavy has been lifted. I hung my coat, untied my scarf, set the folder gently on the kitchen table, did not open it. It had served its purpose. The blue notebook lay where I left it, spine stretched open to a blank page. I sat down, pen in hand. Today I did not write pain, or memory, or proof. I wrote legacy. At the top in dark blue ink I wrote, "What I choose to leave." Then one by one, $50,000 to the public library. To restore the reading room ceiling, repaint the children's section and buy new large print books, because that room held me when no one else did. $100,000 to the college where I taught night classes. Scholarships for women over 40 returning to school, because it is never too late to begin again. $150,000 to a girls' education fund in rural Montana, for the daughters of farmhands, cashiers, and caretakers, because the hardest working women rarely get picked first, but they build the world anyway. No headlines, no buildings with my name, just Kiat placement, deliberate. So the places that caught me could now catch someone else. I reached up to the cabinet above the fridge, pulled down the old lockbox, the one David used for tax receipts and love notes, Taped to the inside lid was a faded sticky note in his handwriting. It said, "Don't forget, your story matters too." I smiled, then opened the folder labeled Legacy Fund, Armstrong Holdings. The numbers were higher than I remembered. The AgriFund had grown quietly like roots under snow. I sorted through paperwork, made a list of contacts, drafted 3 letters, no drama, just intent. I placed the envelopes beside the teapot. Tomorrow, I would walk them to the post office myself. As I packed everything into the binder, my fingers paused on one last file. It was labeled Helen, personal. Inside, only 1 page. David's handwriting again. "If you ever wonder where to plant your name, don't carve it in stone. Put it where it breathes." I folded the page slowly, placed it in the notebook right after today's entry. Then closed the cover, ran my fingers across the worn blue fabric. Note revenge. Note even restoration. Just clarity. They had taken my name off the paper, so I wrote it back in places that will never forget it. I didn't announce anything. No press releases, no letters to the editor, no signatures on glass plaques. I just went. First the library. The old brick one off Elm Street. The same building that held me during the worst of it. Its front steps were freshly painted. A new railing, sturdy and clean. Inside, the children's section smelled like lemon polish and warm paper. The ceiling had been redone, no more water stains. Bright stars painted across a soft blue sky. I watched from the hallway as a little girl traced letters on the spine of a picture book. Her mother smiled nearby, holding a stack of easy readers. No one looked at me. I liked it that way. Next, the college. The night class wing still had that buzz of old fluorescence and coffee breath. I passed a bulletin board with a flyer, scholarship opportunity, women returning to learn, deadline the 1st of March. I paused, let the words settle. In a classroom nearby, a woman maybe in her 50s raised her hand during a lecture. Her voice steady, unsure. The professor smiled as he nodded. You could feel it, the tremble of someone choosing to believe in themselves again. I stood in the hallway for a few minutes, then left without speaking to anyone. Last stop, the office of the Rural Girls Education Fund. It was small, just 3 rooms and a desk, with a jar of dollar store candy. A volunteer sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting donated backpacks. I asked where the donation area was. She pointed without looking up. In the hallway near a bulletin board, I found it. On a shelf, a wooden plaque, plain and simple. It said, "For the women who stayed." I ran my fingers across the lettering. The wood was warm from the afternoon sun through the window. The carving was shallow but sure, not deep like a monument, but steady, intentional. I didn't need anyone to see me. I had seen enough. I stepped outside. The sky had turned that amber hue where the shadows get longer but gentler, where the air feels full even if nothing moves. I stood there for a long while, letting the warmth settle on my shoulders. No phone calls, no questions, just a knowing. This is where my name belongs. Not in fine print, not in legal titles, but in places that live, places that hold, places that remember. I walked back to my car, took one last look at the doorway, then whispered to no one, "I'm still here," and I never left. A few weeks passed. No more calls, no bank alerts, no carefully worded texts pretending nothing had happened, just mornings filled with silence that didn't sting anymore. I got used to the quiet, even began to welcome it. The kettle whistled at the same time each day. I'd let it sing for a few seconds longer now, not out of forgetfulness, but because it felt good to know I could let things wait. I ate breakfast by the window. Same chair, same blue notebook nearby. Sometimes I wrote, sometimes I didn't. The notebook had become less a place for wounds and more a space for stillness. On Thursdays, I still walked to the library, not to leave notes, not to check for them, just to be in a place that never asked me to shrink. I'd sit in the same corner, run my fingers over the shelves. Sometimes I'd pull a book at random, read a paragraph, then close it. Just enough to remind myself I was still curious, still open. One afternoon, the mail arrived late. I almost didn't check it. But something told me to look. A small envelope creased at the corners. Return address Westlake Elementary. Inside a single sheet. Folded twice. Typed in black ink. A title in bold at the top. My quiet hero. I read the first sentence out loud. Most people think heroes are loud. Mine isn't. My breath caught. Alma had written it for a school project. An essay about someone she admired. Someone who mattered. She wrote about our baking days, how I used to hum old songs when she mixed too fast, about the way I always left the light on in the hallway when she stayed over. She wrote, she never raised her voice, but she taught me how to speak. At the bottom, her teacher had scribbled, powerful voice, thank you for sharing this. My hands shook just slightly. I pressed the page flat on the table. Then I walked to the drawer, pulled out a fresh sheet of blue-lined paper. Took the pen I saved for real things, not grocery lists, not reminders. And I wrote, Dear Alma, thank you for seeing me, for remembering the sound of my voice even when others forgot. You are my forever girl, and I am still always your grandma. I signed it slowly, each letter clear, certain. The kettle began to whistle again in the background, but I didn't move yet. Instead, I sat back, folded the letter gently, and watched the light shift on the floor. No noisy, no fanfare, just a full moment, undisturbed. And for the first time in years, I wasn't wondering when the next blow might come. I wasn't bracing. I was simply here, whole, heard, held by nothing more than the truth of being known. That Sunday I went out back. The sun was low, warm on my shoulders. Not too hot, just the kind of heat that settles gently on your skin without asking anything in return. The garden had been quiet all winter. Dry soil, a few stubborn weeds clinging near the edges. But one patch near the fence had always mattered more. It was where David used to sit back, resting against the old oak watering can in one hand, mug of coffee in the other. He loved the lavender, said the scent reminded him of mornings in Provence even though we'd never been. We planted it together years ago, a small bush we picked up from a roadside stand. Back then, we didn't know how long it would last, didn't expect it to spread, but it did. And when he passed, I let it go, neglected the roots, told myself it was too much work. Now I knelt down beside that dry patch, fingers in the earth, pulled gently at what was left. Dead stems, cracked roots. Then I opened the brown paper bag I had brought from the nursery. Inside a new lavender plant, small, not much to look at, but it held promise. I dug slowly, evenly, let the soil fall through my fingers before pressing it back in. Afterward, I sat on the ground, palms dirt-covered, breathing steady. I didn't cry, didn't speak, just listened. The wind moved softly through the fence boards. Somewhere, a neighbor's wind chime sounded. Birds hopped along the wires above. It was enough. I stood up, brushed my hands clean on my jeans, walked to the porch, looked back once. The new lavender stood still, but it belonged now. Like me. Later that evening, I wrote the final page in my notebook. Not a list. Not a memory. Just one line. She no longer waited to be remembered. She simply lived.